Yose ndinonzwa nziyo dzamatachka kwa kori 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 kwa kori 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 kwa That was a folk song that my grandparents taught me and all the other grandchildren as we sat around the fire under the stars at their peaceful rural home in Zimbabwe. You see, for Africans, fire is more than just a source of life and a source of warmth. Fire is the catalyst for storytelling and celebration. Traditional storytelling in the African culture is practiced in the spirit of Ubuntu. Almost forgot about that. So traditional storytelling is practiced in the spirit of Ubuntu. And Ubuntu is an African value system that basically says, I am because we are. This is where we get our collective identity from. So in other words, I am the person I've become today courtesy of my grandparents and the wider community that raised me. Through the oral tradition of storytelling, I have learned my core value system that I carry with me today, wherever I am, consciously and unconsciously. So let me tell you a little bit more about my grandmother. My grandmother, may she rest in peace, was one of 6 children. She herself was born and raised in a poor African village in Zimbabwe, but at the time, Rhodesia, before it became independent. She wasn't very educated. In fact, she would have finished school at the age of 14. She was married by the time she was 16, and she went on to have 11 children. Can you imagine that? Now, my grandma was really kind with firm boundaries. I just remember her compassion, even though at the same time she was no nonsense. She was full of wisdom for any problem that you brought to her, regardless of the situation, and yet expected you to take accountability for what it is that was going on. And despite her humble beginnings, she went on later on, a few years later, to get her O-levels, which is the equivalent of GCSEs. She trained as a teacher, and she eventually earned enough money to buy 2 properties in the nearby town, and she started renting them out as a business. So, growing up listening to stories from my grandparents and my parents taught me to treat people the same, with warmth, humility, respect, but critically to use these values to find common ground quite quickly with people I don't know and build trust, whether they're from the village, like my grandparents, or the CEO of a conglomerate. I learned to be curious about people at a very early age, and it was that curiosity that made me unafraid to take the path less traveled. And that is the power of storytelling. So, from that introduction, you probably have a very good idea of who I am, or do you? So just for fun, where do you think I am from? Where do you think I was born? Harare, Zimbabwe, Johannesburg in South Africa, Accra in Ghana, or Edinburgh in Scotland? What was that? A. Any other guesses? D. Well, it might surprise you that I was in fact born in Edinburgh. I was born in Edinburgh and spent much of my childhood growing up between Leeds in Yorkshire and Zimbabwe. That I was fortunate enough to spend family holidays and sometimes longer across Europe, the US, Australia, thanks to my parents' work and study commitments. That I speak Japanese and I'm equally comfortable in Arabic-speaking countries. That I'm a junior tennis champion in Zimbabwe. And you'll find my name on the champions board in Nailsea Tennis Club in North Somerset. I'm just showing off now. But most importantly, who is Gamchirai? So my name Gamchirai means welcome in Shona, which is my mother tongue. So as I said, I was born in Edinburgh, but I have a very strong connection to my African roots. I've lived and traveled to 34 countries to date, across Africa, Europe, the Middle East. And each stop in each of these countries has enhanced my own superpower, which is my ability to redefine my own boundaries. So, I became a founder and co-founder, as well as a CEO in the last 4 years. I'm a specialist, I like to call myself a specialist, in internationalization and cultural diversity. And by that I mean, I'm really interested in how we approach our work practices with a global lens. Some people call me the Africa Business Translator, but I'm still on my journey to publishing that book. I like to call myself an educator turned entrepreneur, much like my grandmother and my mother after her. But most importantly, I'm a global citizen and the luckiest mum in the world. So as you can hear, I have multiple identities. And had I not shared those identities with you right now, you likely would have walked away with just one, my professional identity. You see, we all have multiple identities. We're made up of social, cultural, professional, as well as our personal identities based on who we are, where we're from, and our lived experiences. And right now in this room, you are interacting with all 34 countries that I have interacted with. And that is rich, valuable data. But the real question to everybody in the room is how much are the untold stories that stem from the multiple identities in your organizations costing you? So let's talk about what is going on in the world of leadership today. We're currently living in the fastest period of change in history. But those who will thrive, the leaders who will thrive, are not those that are solely dependent and reliant on existing playbooks. It's the leaders that embrace new perspectives, integrate diverse knowledge systems, and build connections across multiple boundaries. The changing nature of leadership is one of the most important topics in business conversations today. And it's becoming increasingly important for leaders to be flexible in this ever-changing environment that we're living in today. The landscape is increasingly demanding that leaders are flexible, and there's a real focus on collaboration, emotional intelligence, as well as resilience. So how are we looking at the leaders within our organizations and helping them to adapt to this new reality? Because nowadays, it is so important to be able to engage across multiple cultures, multiple industries, as well as multiple stakeholders at home and abroad if we're going to be successful and remain competitive in this global economy. So our ability to adapt is absolutely crucial, and that really means listening, being observant, problem solving in real time, and finding common ground with people that we think are seemingly really different from us, when in reality, we actually have far more in common than the differences that lie between us, regardless of where we're from in the world. And that takes me nicely to some lessons from Africa that I'd like to share with you. So thinking back to the story that I told you about my grandparents, the African village is in fact the framework for modern leadership development. Now I know that sounds a bit nuts, but hear me out. Traditional leadership focuses on hierarchical top-down approaches where decisions are typically trickled down, and very rarely people listen to the people below them. Leaders listen to the people below them. Whereas in the village, a meeting is a place for frank exchange of opinions and debating of community issues as they arise. Participation in those meetings, as you can see from the picture there, is unlimited. So it's not unusual that you'll find men, women, and their children sat around in a circle at a meeting place because everybody's given the opportunity to speak and share their perspectives. It's actually a platform for dialogue, and it's a platform for a meeting of the minds. It's the vehicle that Africans have used for thousands of years to implement and live the Ubuntu philosophy and values that we know today. What's really interesting is that information in a setting like this is disseminated to everybody at the same time. And this encourages transparency. At the end of it all, consensus is actually reached. So basically, the process is used to collectively examine issues that are burdening the community. And even though everybody's given the opportunity to speak, the final word, yes, lies with the chief. But other residual outcomes of the village meeting include the fact that family values are passed down from generation to generation. It's also a place that leads to community building, as well as counseling of the younger generation within that setting. Which is a perfect segue into our recent project that we've been working on at African Leadership Global, which we call the Stories of African Leadership. So we launched I'm going to call it the Soul Project. We launched the Soul Project a year ago here in the UK with my partner, Nicola Strong. And this was really in response to recent calls for the revitalization of what it actually means to be African in a globalized world. Looking at what African leadership really means to the African who is keen to re-engage with their value system. And that's important because Africans have been moving away from home for years, for decades. With mass migration, we've had to contend with our dual identities along the way. So the aim of the Soul Project was to capture the values, the beliefs, the characteristics, the personality of African leaders from their perspective. And the countries that were represented were Ghana, Nigeria, South Africa, Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, the UK, and Zimbabwe. We deployed 3 teams in South Africa, Ghana, and the UK. And we were able to collect in the pilot phase 95 stories from managers, senior execs, as well as entrepreneurs from loads of different industries. And what we managed to get was a lot of data, both in narrative form and in audio form, depending on their comfort levels. And we're able to analyze that data using a platform that is, it's driven by smart technology. So it allows us to see patterns in the data. And as I was saying before, it allows us to showcase the commonalities over the differences. So, a question for the audience, and I think because it's quite loud in here, I'll probably just ask you to raise your hands before I tell you more about the results of our project. So I want you to think about a scenario where you've been in the workplace and you had to make a decision on something. And think about what your actions were actually based on. Was it your values and principles? Was it your drive to achieve? Or was it the processes and procedures within your organization? So, your actions are based on who would go with values and principles. Okay? What about a drive to achieve? Yep. How about processes and procedures? Interesting. Does anyone have a combination of 2 or more? Okay? And I don't know if I'll be able to hear you, but I'm just going to throw them out. A combination between values and principles and a drive to achieve? Yeah. Okay. A combination between values and principles and processes and procedures? Yeah. What about a combination between drive to achieve and processes and procedures? Nobody. What about all 3? Okay. Interesting. I have one more for you. Where do you get your sense of identity from? Is it yourself or the people that depend on you? Is it your value system, perhaps your religion, your guiding principles, or a specific idea? Or is it the people on whom you depend, such as your family, friends, a community, a gang even? So I get my sense of identity from myself, people that depend on me. Yeah? Okay. You get your sense of identity from your value system, your principles, your religion. Yeah? Or do you get your sense of identity from the people on whom you depend? Okay, and once again, any combinations? Absolutely. Okay, 1 and 2? Yeah. 1 and 3? No? Yeah? Yes? 2 and 3? All 3? Okay. Great. So what I've just taken you through is the very same experience that our leaders that identify as being of African heritage went through with us. But these are our key findings from our research with African leaders. So, speaking of the leaders' actions, according to the respondents, 29% say that their actions are guided by their values and principles. 20% believe both values and principles as well as their drive to achieve influences their actions. And another 20% say that the drive to achieve is the sole influence. And you can see from the diagram that our respondents, the concentration of their answers lie in these 3 areas. And very few are influenced by the organization's processes and procedures. Once again, we asked them about their sense of identity. So the leader and the story that they told gets their sense of identity from, and most people believe that they get it from their value system, which is unsurprising. Their value system, religion, or guiding principle or idea. 17% believe that identity is drawn from all 3 segments. But what's really interesting is that regardless of how you dice this up, community is inextricable. It's linked inextricably to one's sense of who they are. Yeah? Okay. You might be asking yourself, what does African leadership have to do with me? So, in answering this question, I always think, well, when we want to get good at something, we typically find examples of people or case studies where people have done something really, really well, and we study that. And if somebody said, what word would you use, having studied 95 stories of leaders in Africa, what words come to mind when you describe African leaders? The top word for me is resilience. And the next word for me is adaptability. And the reason for that is because Africans have gone through quite a lot from historical times, from colonization to mass migration. They've had to be really adaptable and really resilient, not only in their home countries, but wherever else they ended up in the world. So what is resilience? What do we really mean by that? Well, resilience is a combination of our adaptability, as well as our understanding, our mental flexibility to catch up with all those changes, as well as our learning, our ability to learn. And these are critical skills, not just for African leaders, but for all leaders. So what do we need to do in order to build leaders that are fit for this future that we're heading into? Well, we all need to look beyond D&I, first of all. It's no longer just about workforce representation. It's actually more about the fact that there's increasing globalization and we're all interacting with different parts of the world, no matter what we do and what industries we're in. So our profile of leaders has got to evolve because times are evolving. We cannot stay stagnant. True inclusion in this day and age is more about agility and not rigidity. So how is leadership informed? It's got to be informed differently, which means we all have something new to learn. At African Leadership Global, we believe that diversity is a multi-stakeholder commitment, okay? So when we talk about leadership nowadays, we have to think about ways to make sure that it's consistent, not just across our workforce and our teams, but at the strategic level of global partnerships. It's crucial for organizations to recognize as well that shifting the method does not mean shifting the mission. So we can change, we can adapt our DE&I strategies without changing who we are at the core of what we do. So the real question is, How can leadership emerge with consistency across cultures, industries, and global markets? There is a real business impact if we are not able to answer this question. Cultural gaps and misalignment between ourselves and our stakeholders being one of them. It really undermines team cohesion, it brings in inefficiencies, and we miss opportunities for collaboration. We also will struggle to get the right caliber of management, particularly if we're hiring for senior executive roles. And poor leadership also leads to talent pipeline leakage, as we know, with 40% higher leakage among global ethnic majority leaders. The other detriment is you're likely to miss 56% of emerging market opportunities when you do not tap into the indigenous knowledge within your organizations. So, interestingly, this is the UN's map of where the world is headed. So as we can see, the purple line represents Africa, the green line represents Asia, and all the other colored lines represent America, the Caribbean, Oceania, and Europe. It's a pretty clear picture where the world is headed to 2100. 90% of the world's population is going to be living in Africa and Asia. In other words, there'll be more people in Nigeria and China than there are in the US and Europe combined. So this is actually where the future of your workforce and your leaders are coming from. Another fun fact. Here is the map of Africa. And it just gives you an indication of the sheer size of this continent. Africa is actually 14 times larger than the world map depicts it. It's large enough to fit the United States, China, India, Eastern Europe, the UK, Italy, Switzerland, Germany, France, Spain, Portugal, Belgium, and the Netherlands. That's the true size of this continent, just to put it into perspective. Potentially not what you expected. But this is the realistic image. And when you think about the size of this continent, you start to talk about the potential in multiples. Now, when we're looking at the 54 countries represented on this vast land, it's impossible to gather all the traditional historic wisdom of this continent, but we're trying one country at a time. As I said, we started in South Africa and Ghana, and we're hoping to continue across the entire continent. So let me leave you with this. How will you redefine your boundaries and connect your leaders to indigenous knowledge? I don't think I really need to spell it out even further than I already have, but the future of leadership isn't just diverse. It's adaptable, it's strategic, and it's global. But I hope you can appreciate how the value of African perspectives on good leadership is not just for African leaders, it's for all of us. So what we need to do, we need to think differently. Because what we believe creates our thoughts create our actions, and our actions create evidence. So if we want new evidence, we need to change our actions. We want to stay pragmatically positive. So focus on practical solutions and maintaining a positive outlook, even when we're facing challenges. And we want to create a circle of safety for you and your people. I think it's really important to do that. And this allows the multiple identities of the individuals within your organizations to emerge. So what will you do differently today? I will leave you with this African proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. Thank you for listening. And if you haven't already chatted with us at our stand, we're on stand 195, or catch me when I jump off the stage. But it's been a real pleasure talking to you today.